Cheryl Baroli.
Okay, we'll call to order the August 10th meeting of the Plan Commission. Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Curry?
Here.
Commissioner Krillenberger is absent. Commissioner Hurley is absent. Commissioner Jablonski is absent. Commissioner Cernovich?
Here.
Commissioner Willoughby?
Here.
Commissioner Fiasconi? Here. Commissioner Moore?
Here.
Chairman Cashman?
Here. Next order of business are public comment for any non-agenda items. Is there anyone here who wants to speak about it, something that's not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on. Next order of business are the approval of minutes from our July 13th, 2022 meeting. Do the commissioners have any requested revisions or additions to the minutes?
None.
Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve the minutes as submitted?
So moved, Willoughby.
Second, Cernovich.
Roll call vote, please, Bethany?
Commissioner Curry?
Abstain.
Commissioner Cernovich?
Aye.
Commissioner Willoughby?
Aye.
Commissioner Fiasconi? Aye. Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Chairman Cashman?
Aye. Next order of business are findings and recommendations. We have one. It's case A-14-2022 for 14 West First Street. Elevera MD, exterior appearance and site plan review to allow for facade improvements to the existing building at 14 West First Street in the B2 Central Business District. Again, do the commissioners have any suggested revisions or additions to the findings and recommendations as submitted? No. Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve them as submitted?
So moved, Cernovich.
Second, Fiasconi.
Roll call vote, please, Bethany?
Commissioner Curry?
Can I vote on that?
Yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Cernovich?
Aye.
Commissioner Willoughby?
Aye.
Commissioner Fiasconi? Aye. Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Chairman Cashman?
Aye. Next, we have a public hearing. It's case A-16-2022 for 101 West Chestnut Street. Special use permit to allow for an animal hospital in the B1 Community Business District and an exterior appearance site plan review to allow for changes to the existing building site for Vet Chart LLC located at 101 West Chestnut Street. And do we need to swear in anyone who's going to testify or speak on this matter? Welcome.
Good evening. I'm Patrick McGinnis. I'm an attorney with Donatelli & Koulis that represents the Vet Chart LLC, which is a tenant of the owner of the property, Hinsdale Management Corporation. And their lease is contingent on village approval of their intended use for the property. The subject property is 101 West Chestnut Street, which is located in the B1 zoning district, which is located on Chestnut between Grant and Lincoln. Applicant is seeking a special use permit to operate a veterinary clinic at that location. Veterinary clinics are considered a special use in the B1 district and are only permitted in standalone built. Applicant's also seeking approval of an exterior appearance and site plan review to allow for the removal of the existing drive-through that was used by the previous tenant of the property, which is Republic Bank, to add an outdoor enclosed space to use for animals, to add a parklet for employees, add planter boxes, and also would allow for a loading space, and also minor changes to the elevation. Applicant's request for a special use for a vet clinic meets all the standards required for a special use. First, the proposed use is consistent with the purposes of the village code. The B1 district provides for community businesses which support the suburban community, and vet clinics are specifically allowed as a specific use in that district. The applicant's lender actually did a market analysis of the community, found that in addition to it being able to support another vet practice, that there was actually a need for an additional vet practice for the community. So in addition to being consistent with what the district intends to accomplish, it actually helps to further those goals. Second, it wouldn't cause any undue impact on the adjacent properties or the community. It would actually provide for a less intensive use of the property than what was previously used as a bank. The business would start with about 2 to 3 employees working at a time and would have 1 to 2 patients per hour, which again would be less intensive than individuals coming for a community bank. Third, it wouldn't interfere with the surrounding development. Again, it would have lower intensity than previously for the surrounding businesses. It would actually be in harmony with the other businesses in the district. There's also a grooming facility, Velvet Touch Pet Salon, that's across the street. Applicant's business wouldn't provide any grooming services, so their businesses would actually go hand in hand together. Fourth, there's adequate public facilities for their intended use, and we wouldn't need any changes to the current public facilities to accomplish their goals. Fifth, it wouldn't increase any traffic congestion to the district. Again, 1 to 2 patients would be seen per hour, less intensive than a bank. And there's also adequate parking on the property. The business would need about 14 parking spaces, but it has 32 to accommodate all the clients, which is more than they'll need. Additionally, there wouldn't be any destruction of significant features for the property. The existing structure would remain mostly intact, except for the removal of the drive-through, some exterior updates, and obviously renovations to the inside so that it could be operated as a veterinary clinic. Seventh, it would be in compliance with all the standards required by the code. It's a standalone building for the veterinary practice. We would be removing the drive-throughs because they wouldn't be needed, and they're also not allowed for veterinary practice. There wouldn't be any overnight operation of the business, and the normal business hours would just be 7:30 a.m. to about 5:30 p.m. The operation of a vet clinic would also provide a public benefit to the community. Again, the applicant's lenders' market research showed that there's actually a need for an additional vet clinic, and the location of the business district is not within 250 feet or near any residential properties. The building's been vacant for quite a while, and it would be bringing back a business to this business for the district. The applicant also lives locally in Western Springs with their family, so she's also dedicated to the community and helping to bring that public benefit. There aren't any alternative locations that would better suit the business. The property, again, would be in the business district, not within close distance of any residential areas. The alternative animal businesses in the community, Hinsdale Animal Hospital, is within the distance of residential properties and does provide overnight boarding services, which we would not. And additionally, the Hinsdale Humane Society is near several apartment buildings in Hinsdale. So this location is actually more beneficial, and that there aren't any other locations that would be better suited for their business. Lastly, applicants taken any steps to mitigate any adverse impacts, of which there are very few. Again, there's no overnight boarding. Dogs are only taken outside of the facility one at a time with an employee on a leash into the enclosed area that they're seeking to put on the property. And they would have artificial turf and a drainage mat in that space to clean up any waste from the animals. There's a similar facility in Burr Ridge that provides for a daycare that has a large space with the same turf and drainage system, and they don't have any issues with smell or cleanliness. This obviously would be less intensive than that facility would be. So the applicant's proposed use of the property meets all the criteria and standards within the village code for a special use. It would provide a public benefit by bringing a needed business to the vacant location. And the alternative location, there aren't any alternative locations, and there are minimal adverse impacts. Turn it over to the architects who can talk more about the site plan and the exterior appearance for the property.
Thank you. Thank you. Pat Callahan with Studio GC, 223 West Jackson in Chicago. The majority of the work will happen inside to convert the bank to a animal hospital. On the exterior, essentially what we're doing is using the canopy for the old drive-through and creating essentially a wooden fence that allows us to actually create a little bit of a parklet closer to the street, along with planters that will be planted with easily maintained but greenery that would allow for greenery year-round. The intent behind the turf is really for animals who either before or after procedures need to relieve themselves. It really is not a dog run per se, and it's not intended to be there for general use for dogs to be out there free and kind of using that area for a run. It's really designed specifically to complement the use that's happening inside the clinic itself. But for the most part, our intent would be to shield that from public view, and then and then again introduce a parklet that provides some additional outdoor space for employees, break, but also the potential for the public to be able to leverage that as well on walks down the street. So for the most part, I'll leave it at that. We are providing a striped zone, kind of a loading zone, just on the, what I guess would be the second drive-through or the outer drive-through that we're not fencing. But the intent is not to have any parking or anything along that area. It would just be for any deliveries that the clinic actually has. The entrance is on the rear, so it would be the north side around the corner, which would be the primary location where deliveries would be made.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? If not, we'll see if the commissioners have any questions. Cynthia?
Just one question, and I didn't see it on the plan, so maybe it was just in the verbiage, but it does state that there will be a crematorium on premise.
So there won't be a crematorium on premise. They have a service that comes with a vehicle that would do the crematories.
Okay, so
cremation
there
for them.
will not be
pickup.
one.
Correct.
It's a pickup, okay, so I'm familiar with that. And I had a question about the storm drain being used for refuse, as small as it is. But that's nothing I think we have to be, or
It's really a Rob McGinnis issue.
that's,
So ultimately, Flag Creek is going to make the call on whether we tie it into the sanitary or the storm, but it will be piped regardless.
okay.
And again, I don't think it will end up being a significant amount, just because it's, again, the space dog run, just
Right.
more of a space that can be used to help the animals relieve themselves if necessary.
And I'm sure you probably have special services, but for waste in light of surgeries that you'd be performing, that type of waste would not be in a dumpster on the premises, correct?
Correct.
That's something that's a biohazard, okay. Good.
Julie?
I think it's a nice repurpose of the building, and this will be a service, so many dogs in Hinsdale, and cats.
Hence the need.
I did have a question though about, it said no overnight boarding, but will you have animals like overnight recovering from surgery or?
Do you mind going to the
Oh,
microphone?
you need to go to the mic, because it's being recorded.
Sorry,
Thank
so no, that's Sarah Baker. That's not the intention for the hospital use for overnight care. Really, the highest level of medical care, if no one's there overnight, we shouldn't have an animal inside there overnight. So something that does need a transfer, something like that,
Okay.
that have 24-hour care, and those pets would be transferred. Yeah.
Will you be selling any products? Will there be any sales tax revenue to the village?
Oh, I would assume so, yeah, just through pharmaceutical products, because we sell all of that as
Okay.
in component with medical care, so yes.
That's a plus. Okay. That's all I had. I was going to ask about the crematorium too, but.
Thanks, Julie. Mark?
Just a couple quick questions on the parking. Is any of that parking used by like Fuller employees or anything like that at this time, or is that all parking? The parking that you said you have, is it dedicated?
Yeah, I don't know if it's being used by any Fuller
Okay.
employees, but it is designated for our property.
Okay, just some days there's quite a few cars in there for.
Correct. It's
Yeah.
it's designated for the Republic Bank, but
Okay.
because no one has been there for so
Yeah. A little bit of a takeover.
intention is to have that
Free for
relabeled
all.
and it would be our use.
Okay,
Yes.
all
Yeah.
right. And then my other question regarding the planters, I like the idea of adding greenery to that area. It's nice. I just don't know that the planters themselves, they kind of stick out. I don't know. They just, I don't know if, like, I like brick planters, but it's just they kind of stand out. So I'm not against them, but I'm not completely in favor.
They're very modern.
Yeah, that's kind of what it is, I think. Yeah, so, I don't know. That's just I'll make a statement on that, but I won't vote against that.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Anna?
My questions have been answered.
Yeah. Scott?
The only one I would add is by the waste area where you're running them, you can have a spigot out there so that you can hose things down in the summertime when it gets hot.
Yeah, that's the intention too.
Okay,
Yep.
sounds good. Thank you. Everything else has been answered. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. I think it is a great repurposing of this building. It's been empty for a while. You mentioned you look from Western Springs. Do you have other locations? You mentioned something about Burr Ridge. Do you have a location in Burr Ridge?
No, I contacted a large daycare facility in Burr Ridge that has a similar, much larger scale church, just so
Okay.
I kind of understand how they did it and what their odor control was, how they're maintaining it, and they essentially told me they have 100 to 150 dogs out there per day and have no issue with it, the way that they maintain it. So for us, it would be maybe max 5 dogs out there per day. No, so I don't have another facility currently.
Okay.
I live in Western Springs. I work in the city for now, but it's obviously my intention to bring it to this community. So.
Great. Welcome to Hinsdale. It's, I think, well done, and I think this would be a great addition to the town.
I have one more question. Will you be back for signage, an application for sign?
Oh, yes, yes, okay.
Well, then we'll see you in the future.
And then one other question,
Sure.
if I may.
Sure.
On your plan, it says Hinsdale Animal Hospital.
It's not, that was not correct.
It's not, okay, I didn't know if you had an association with them, if this was a satellite or.
No,
Not at all.
The name will be Lane Veterinary, L-A-N-E,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you. Looks great.
Great, thank you very much. Any other discussion, commissioners? Hearing none? Can I have a motion to approve case A-16, 2022 for 101 West Chestnut Street for a special use permit to allow for an animal hospital in B1 Community Business District, and exterior appearance and site plan review for changes to the existing building and site?
So move Curry?
Second, Willoughby.
A roll call vote, please, Bethany?
Commissioner Curry,
Aye.
Commissioner Cernovich,
Aye.
Commissioner Willoughby.
Aye.
Commissioner Fiasconi.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
Chairman Cashman.
Aye. Good luck, welcome.
Thank you.
Next, we have some public hearings, or meetings, I mean. The first, and Bethany can jump in here, this case A-17, 2022 for 36 East Hinsdale Avenue, Performance Wealth Management. You may have noticed it's in the agenda, but was not in the packet.
Yes.
And
Say, yeah, that's what I was.
I was panicking.
so I'll let Bethany jump in an explanation, but they basically, we'll see them in the future, but they are still getting the materials together.
We like to keep you guys on your feet just to make sure you're actually reading the packet.
So you're reading the
Here's a
agenda?
trick. No, last minute they pulled out. They weren't able to, based on the recommendations from the Historic Preservation Commission, make some of the design changes. There's going to be some changes from what was presented at the Historic Preservation Commission on signage and kind of the design of this outdoor surround on the rear of the building. So we're hoping that that does come forward next month.
Okay. So we will see that next month. So the next case is A-15, 2022 for 36 South Washington Street and 4 West Hinsdale Avenue for air room, exterior appearance review, and site plan review to allow for changes to exterior facade of the existing building and a sign permit review to allow for the installation of 2 new wall signs on the building at 36 South Washington Street and 4 West Hinsdale Avenue in the B2 Central Business District. And before we get to the applicant, I just kind of want to, as you went through the package, you may have seen the history with the HPC. I don't know if any of the commissioners watched the meeting. I think this agenda item was at least over an hour with Jim and the group. So there's been a lot of back and forth. I was trying to follow the bouncing ball, got the video, reviewed it, talked with Jim and Bethany about it. And we'll see how this develops, but basically, there were a lot of changes that were discussed at the HPC, and you'll see there's the original submittal in here, and then the revised, which was revised in, I think, less than a day. I think Jim saw it, and I'm sure the rest of the HPC members or commissioners. There's discussion, there's a lot of back and forth about signage, about internally illuminated signs versus halo. The original packet was internally illuminated signage, which was not really supported generally by the HPC. And then there's an alternative in here for halo lit signage. And so things were revised due to a smaller turnout at the HPC meeting. There was a vote, 3 in favor, 1 against, but because there were only 3, it really ended up being a denial. And I think you saw that Bethany did a great job with the supplement materials for this. So my recommendation would be, and I'm just one commissioner, is I'd like to have the Mr. Klein give an overview on the project, or his representatives. Like the commissioners to share their thoughts with the applicant, but ultimately, I think the best course of action would be for us to recommend this goes back to HPC so that it can be, thoroughly revised and clearly cleaned up, and let them properly review it so that then we can hear their deliberations and, act accordingly. I think especially in the historic district, I think I've worked well with HPC in listening to their deliberations and using as guidance, and I think right now I wouldn't say things are clear on this packet. I appreciate Bethany's desire to keep things moving and everything, but I do think, though, it would delay the applicant a month. I think it would be the best course of action, but ultimately, that's up to the rest of the commissioners to see if they support that idea. So with that as a brief introduction, I'd love to hear from the applicant, and then we'll see what the commissioners' thoughts are on the matter, and then we'll see where to go from there.
Good evening. I am standing as Arum's representative. My name is Jack Klein. My father, Mike Klein, who you probably saw on the very long video last week, he came down with a couple symptoms. So
from that meeting?
I don't think anyone was sick in that meeting. So he resides at home right now, just safety and precaution, of course, of today's world. But we appreciate Jim and Bethany's help here. From the previous meeting, it was very helpful to at least keep the ball moving, and that's really our goal with everything. We soon hope to begin our build out and really be a part of the community that we're really appreciative of, very welcoming. Welcome, but I have prepared a couple slides regarding our previous meeting to show a little bit of our initial submission prior to the HPC meeting, and then to refer to some of the changes we made on the previous, or the following day with Jim and Bethany's help.
And what is your first name?
My name's Jack.
Jack, okay, thanks, Jack.
So I would like to just show this first slide. This is on the left, as you can see, a image of the original building from the, I believe, late 1800s. Our goal with a lot of our design work on the front signage was to incorporate that larger storefront with more glass and to restore a little bit of what was there historically. On the right, of course, is the previous tenant, the flower shop, that we are taking the space of. Another view of the South Washington retail storefront, just a reference point. This was the original submission. So originally our sign proposal was a box cabinet signage that was internally lit with punch-through letters, where we kind of discussed with the HPC that they weren't huge fans of that direction. So ultimately, with our revisions and Jim's help in his correspondence, some of the big feedback points were we needed a little bit more of an architectural element or architectural feature to really enhance the colonial revival that Hinsdale is shooting for, and especially the HPC as well. So that was a big part of our discussion in last week's meeting. I don't know if this visual representation is great for you guys sitting so far away, but the changes we ultimately made was creating an architectural pediment where our sign actually sits on a 4-inch wide kind of wooden box, where this aluminum pediment would sit almost as a canopy, also incorporating some corbels, which really, I thought brought through that traditional colonial revival element that we were striving for after the previous meeting, and some architectural trim around the actual sign as well. And feel free to stop me with any questions. Another, just a side-by-side so you can see the comparison from where we started to what the revised drawings were.
Okay.
On the right side, it's still a rendering, so bear with us, but that is our night view. So it may look a little dark in terms of the white imagery, but it is still a white architectural back panel, a 2-inch back panel, and the letters are illuminated as well as our logo. I've also included the existing street view side of the Hinsdale Avenue signage. So on the Hinsdale Avenue, we will have a retail window that will look into our first floor showroom, but also access to our second floor offices. So it's very important for us to also have that signage on the Hinsdale side, as that is a highly trafficked area, and as well for our internal members.
Okay.
As you can see, I wanted to mention here that the existing flower sign is a little bit protrudes outside that window frame. That was also a topic of discussion last week. Our sign actually sits flush with both jambs, so it's a little bit more symmetrical and I think a little bit more aesthetically pleasing to the eye. Here's a little bit of a setback view of our proposed signage. Again, mimicking the South Washington Street signage. This was also a box sign illuminated in the same way. And before I get to that, unless you guys would rather me kind of press forward on those alternative options, we can,
Yeah,
take
I'd
any
say
questions.
press forward and then we can
Okay.
ask plenty of questions.
Sounds good. So I've also broken out the alternative options. So another point that was made last week was the HPC recommended more of a halo lit approach for the illumination. A couple, not concerns, but comments were brought up on our end where, previous tenants are allowed that 25 square foot signage for their storefront. We were a little bit handicapped there without the grandfathered in approach, so we had, I believe it was close to 19 square feet to work with our new signs.
Okay.
And in order to get that halo lit approach for all of our signage, especially on the South Washington Street side, we made some compromises on the Hinsdale Avenue signage that I'll allude to next slide. But in order to get all of our logo and scripture below the Design Build Studio, the text actually had to be a little bit larger to just illuminate. And Aurora Sign is here as well, Aaron and Michelle, as our representatives, and they can touch a little bit on why we had to increase the actual footprint or square footage of that signage to incorporate those halo lit letters.
I'm Michelle Fories. I'm with Aurora Sign Company. Thanks, Jack.
Welcome.
As he's indicating on the front elevation for Washington, we did have to enlarge the stroke of the font in order to accommodate the LED scope inside a halo lit letter versus the original submittal that went before the historic board, where the illumination source was inside the recessed cabinet, but the letters themselves were acrylic that pushed through the face with an opaque vinyl on the front face of the letter, so therefore only the edges of the letters would illuminate to give the halo lit effect. But that version allowed us to keep their original font, their original brand style, with that thinner stroke and the smaller letter height. This was our best compromise. We did deviate from what their normal branding is and their font script for that secondary line copy in order to make it a little beefier. And that's how we were able to accommodate a halo lit style letter. The version that's shown for that secondary option here, that totals 14.4 square feet. Again, we were still trying to stay within the restriction that we had overall for their allowable signage, accommodating this and what was planned for the Hinsdale Avenue side.
Okay, excellent. One thing just to bear in mind, Commissioners, on that is, and Bethany did a great job, the authority that we have to basically vary 5% is that I think what you're currently proposing, if I total up right, is about, instead of 125, it's at 129, 0.5, you're about 4 over, but with our ability, without doing a variance, but our ability as a plan commission, we could go up to 131 square feet. So if that allowed, a nice compromise to something that would satisfy HPC, allows you to, have your signage and work properly, I think we have some elbow room to make that happen. So
we appreciate that. And just to emphasize, the difference from option 1 to option 2, it's really the illumination. So nothing really changes in the overall construction of the sign. It's really to incorporate the signage being illuminated at relatively subtle as well. I just wanted to point out, and it's very important for us, for our brand and identity, to have everything illuminated, especially in a lovely town like Hinsdale.
Could I ask just one question related to that? So, like what you're proposing there, is it correct that everything is halo with the exception of the logo, which is actually an
Correct.
illuminated logo?
Correct.
Okay.
How many locations do you have?
Sorry.
How many locations do you have?
We've been around for 65 years, and we've been located in Lincoln, in between Toohey and Pratt, right on North Lincoln Avenue, off 94. We had a secondary location in the early to mid 2000s in Naperville, off Aurora Road and 59, but it's since been closed for about 12 years. So this would be our second location.
Great.
To a little touch on the Hinsdale Avenue side, what we essentially compromised with the feedback from the HPC was that with the increase of the signage, we weren't able to get our bottom text, the architects, builders, and remodelers since 1958, illuminated at all with the increase or the overall font size. So the compromise we made here was to just keep our, heirloom namesake and logo illuminated the same way as the Washington Avenue or Washington Street side, halo lit with the 2-inch backer architectural panel as well.
And then the lettering below is just non-illuminated,
Non-illuminated.
pin-mounted? Okay.
Correct.
Sounds good.
And then I had some examples of some downtown signs, but any questions would be appreciated.
I think that was a great overview. I appreciate it. So maybe we'll start with Scott. Questions, comments?
No, and I appreciate your summary at the beginning. I thought that was really good. No,
There was a lot in this packet.
Yeah,
Oh,
and it's
oh, wow.
complicated, and the gentleman and the people behind us.
Yes, they did a lot of heavy lifting last week.
No, I think that's really important, everything you said. So I look forward to seeing how this develops. I appreciate you giving latitude as well and making sure the parameters are set for everybody to kind of come to compromises too. I think that's really smart to kind of outline that up front. So thank you for doing that.
Sure.
I really don't have questions at this point and look forward to seeing it down the line.
Good. Anna?
Yeah, I agree. I think it looks nice, but I understand the concern with the preservation of the space, so.
Thanks, Anna. Mark?
So I just we got a lot of versions of the sign in our packet, and I agree with kicking it back to HPC as well, Steve, just so
Okay.
we're aware. So just to be clear, like the options, what will you be planning on taking to the HPC?
So that's also a question for us tonight. I know we've kind of gone back and forth with Bethany a little bit. We don't want to fall in this little bit of an unknown space where we're meeting with you guys and then running back and meeting with the HPC to incorporate different recommendations. So I think a really important feedback point from you guys tonight is to direct us a little bit and kind of give us some feedback into what we should ultimately propose in that next meeting, if that's ultimately the course of action, to allow us to keep our construction plans moving, just with the industry and the lead times of everything, especially with our glass storefront. Just the window work itself, we've got a lot of lag, so we're really trying to keep moving so we don't get pushed back a month or two with our overall soft opening plans.
Yeah, I guess my thoughts are there's different versions of the sign that we've seen. There's a lot of going on with some of those signs with the secondary tagline and the Since 1958. I like the fact of not illuminating. I'm not a big fan of illuminating everything if we don't have to. And I know we can't say what's on the sign or talk about what's on the sign, but the fact that all the secondary tagline, the Since 58, some of that gets really busy for me, especially.
agree, yeah.
That's kind of my opinion. So I know we saw options in here with just the name and just the logo. I like that the best, to be honest. That's my opinion.
Good. Julie? Thanks, Mark.
And just to comment on that,
Yeah.
we'd love for that to be the case as well. It's just, unfortunately, not everybody knows us as
That's
a
fair.
design build
Yeah.
company. So it's, it is really important for us to have some form of identity, and especially illuminated because, we made some sacrifices, but, that's a really key part of our brand recognition is to know that who we actually are, right?
And that's fair, and I appreciate that.
And that's just something I really want to harp on because without that, it's, we're just Heirloom, and hopefully everybody that has seen our name or seen our job signs would know or know at least a reference point. But that's a really big descriptor for us in our signage.
And that's fair, I appreciate that. I was,
Yeah, no, I
busy, I
just
guess.
wanted to
Yeah.
definitely emphasize that because that's a strong point for us.
Julie?
I was concerned that your first sign proposals were too modern for the building. It's an iconic building. It's kind of like a gateway to Hinsdale. It's very noticeable from the train. I was also very concerned with your first set of design plans. I think I should also add that this is not about compromise, but it's, trying to fit in with the downtown historic district. So I appreciate that you're headed in the right direction. Another thing about the signage for the building, this building has been in front of Plan Commission several times over the years, several times with issues related to the signage where maybe something happened years ago that did not meet the code or somebody was trying to get something else put in. So we need to be very careful moving forward. And I'm pleased that it's going back to HPC for review because everything that's in front of us right now is rather confusing. And I think HPC, they're a very good sounding board, trying to make sure that everything fits in well with their downtown. So I think we're headed in the right direction. Thank you.
Just in terms of the options, is there any feedback to one or the other that we should pursue in your eyes?
I kind of agreed with what Mark had to say. Thought the one sign was a little bit too busy, but I do understand that this is your.
Which sign are you referring to?
The one that's on.
Hinsdale?
Yes, on Hinsdale Avenue.
The second option or the first option?
The one that had, yes,
secondary tagline.
Yes,
and this is
yes.
1958.
Right.
So what we're seeing there essentially.
The non-illuminated.
right.
Yeah.
And that does get a lot of, visibility from the train and people coming and going.
Could I ask one question, clarify on that one, is it halo lit? Like you have the nighttime view there. In the daytime, is this going to be mounted just to is there going to be the box behind it? Or is it going to be mounted to the brick? What's the approach on the sign there?
So we actually have a 2-inch back panel, like an architectural aluminum,
Okay.
that will be mounted on the brick, and those letters will be punched through.
For the upper sign, and then the ones below are just pin mounted to the brick, or?
Everything would be pin mounted and halo lit. I think I have that right.
On
Option 2.
sorry. In the original submittal, that, again, they were calling it an illuminated box sign, all
Right.
of the LEDs were inside of it, and all of the letters were going to be routed and pushed through the
Right,
base
illuminated,
with the
right.
halo lit. In the secondary option, it was just that Heirloom and the logo that was going to be a halo lit style letter.
Okay.
And the letters beneath it were going to be pin mounted, non-illuminated,
Okay.
but still on a backer so that they were.
On the backer,
Yes,
okay.
so there would not be just brick behind it to be a little
Okay,
distracting.
gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
And one more question about the sign that's on Washington. Now, you're going to be removing the canopy that's up there now,
The existing
correct?
canopy, correct. yeah.
Okay. And then, so your background, that's all going to be black across the whole front of the building?
No, white.
No, it's a,
Right.
yeah,
Oh, I'm
it's a
sorry, I'm
white
looking at
back.
the
Like that
nighttime.
one.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Sorry, it
Night
could be
will be white.
easily confusing.
Well, okay, I'm looking at the nighttime, okay.
Night view, yeah.
Okay.
But yes, it will be just a flush aluminum white back panel, about 2 inches thick. Behind it is a actual wooden box, about 4 inches, that's sitting off the brick, just to give us better access to actually mount it and have it be that canopy style that we had talked about in the previous meeting as a a pseudo overhang of the front entryway.
Is there brick behind that part of the sign, the backing?
So we're actually putting in a steel beam because we're actually raising up the windows. So that is ultimately what we're also covering with the architectural panel, is that, you know, a steel beam isn't that aesthetically pleasing. So we are, you know, hoping to cover that up with our removal of the brick and raising those windows up to incorporate a little bit of a more open glass storefront view.
Thank you.
Thanks. Julie, Cynthia?
Yeah, I had a question. I'm in the same camp, I think, as Mark and Julie, you know, about the sign that's on Hinsdale Avenue. In the fact it's a lot of stuff. And I'm wondering, so you have an entrance next to it to access, am I understanding right? There's
Correct. So
architects
this
on
is,
that
yeah,
end?
this is the first floor window, and then about, you know, I don't know, 6 feet to the right is a door that goes up to our second floor offices, as well as the tenant to the, I don't know what direct, the west side,
The other side,
yeah,
okay.
as well.
So a customer coming in would go into a showroom on the Washington Street side, they'd come see the architects on the Hinsdale Avenue side.
Architects is strictly just office.
It's
So
just
our
office.
office space upstairs is just for offices. Our retail entrance is on Washington. However, this window looks into our showroom on the first floor. So the sign is representing our retail and storefront that will be entered on the Washington side.
Okay, so that's where I'm wondering if that's your office space that you're accessing. Is there a necessity for this signage on this window?
At all, you're saying?
Yes.
We think, you know, as you guys had mentioned, you know, Hinsdale is a highly trafficked area, the avenue being, and you know, members of Hinsdale coming off the train, entering the train, whatever it might be, you know, that's really important for us to have our identity and presence on that street side. So yes, I think that is really important for us, as well as our employees as well, knowing, you know, where they're entering into their offices. As simple as it sounds, you know, that's pretty essential just to any, you know, business.
Right, because I assume they know where they're going, but it's a building that is highly visible from the, even on the Washington Street side, you see this. I just wondered if there was an option where it was something on the window, if you wanted to have, you know, since 1958, was it, or 56? And you had air room on the glass rather than having the additional signage, but you think that's important to have that there?
It's really important for us. So yes, just to have, you know, our brand recognition on that side as well.
I appreciate the work you've done already with the HPC. And I look forward to hearing your future discussions with them, but I do think the idea, I understood as the meeting went on, following kind of the bouncing ball of the meeting, because it was quite long, that it kind of, the idea of keeping it simple, but then I like the idea that Jim was talking about, and that you kind of presented here, where you created more of a architectural element, instead of being like a 5-inch deep box, kind of a sign box. Now it's at 6 out about a foot. There's a cap detail. You go a little wider than the masonry opening and the brackets. So I think those are all good moves. Looks like that with the opportunity now, you can have some kind of lighting at the entry. It looks like you have some small, you have a.
Yeah, so
flick there,
as
illuminate
as
that
it
door.
stands right now, there's a little exterior foyer entrance into that flower shop. So we're actually flushing out the front of our store. So there will obviously be interior lighting as well, just to, you know, keep the lights on. But our lighting and illumination is really coming from our sign as well as the overhang sits.
I mean, I think you're definitely getting in the right direction. I would just encourage, before you go through the submitting to them again, is maybe just a little bit more discussion with the chair and to get some feedback, and with Bethany's help, so that when you put your package together, it's clean. They can then debate it in detail, and then when we get here about next month, we get a nice succinct recommendation to us. I definitely like the halo lit better than the illuminated sign before. I appreciate the efforts, especially the one facing the tracks. And I imagine, Bethany, because they didn't really talk about any window signage, but they'd have the opportunity for some window signage, correct?
In this case, because of the way this building and the signage is set up, there's very little room for extra
Left.
window
Okay.
signage.
Okay.
Yeah, but we need to work with them to calculate these most recent plans with the halo lit to figure out if there is any room left. But I believe they weren't proposing any window signage.
I remember specifically that they mentioned they were not.
Yep.
Because my only thought would be with like that sign and the verbiage on it, who is your target audience? If it's someone sitting in a train, then that's one thing. If it's a pedestrian, then they're not going to be able to read that. You know, so
In the daytime, I would argue that, it could be legible to be read.
you could, if you're parking, but walking along that sidewalk, it's going to be really difficult to kind of get that. I think around the corner, you can definitely read anything on that sign because you could be over by Starbucks, you have a little more distance to read it. But that's just something to consider, that if you were to trade some text off of this sign for if you're directing it at pedestrians, then you could possibly transfer some square footage of signage
Sure.
to window signage where it's down at eye level, where it might catch them. Because a lot of our retail, companies, they'll have a mix where they have their identification up high, but then it's a little bit now at eye level and some other additional signage. So it's just something to consider as you go forward.
Appreciate that. Just a question, in terms if we do something like that, and I know you said that you guys were willing to go up to 131%.
5% above the maximum, yeah.
But in that case, is the enlargement acceptable in this instance?
I think I'd really defer, so long as HBC likes the approach. If we have some latitude, and we're basically like splitting hairs here, but if it allows you to do what you need to do, it's sympathetic to the historic nature of the downtown, I think we certainly could find a solution there. And it seems like you have, basically like 6 square feet to work with.
Right, that 5% only gives about 6 square feet in
Right.
addition.
But 6 square feet of signage, when
We'll
you're
take
talking like-
anything.
it depends on the size of the font. But,
Yeah, and we were definitely willing to forego the, since 1958 and that same Washington-style text with design build studio or something along those lines to be a little bit more minimalistic and simple in that regard as well. So we're very open to that. It just, the illumination is definitely a big importance for us, as well as having a little bit of context. So we can discuss with Bethany if it makes sense to move towards something in the window. But I think our strong preference would be just signage.
And I'm fine with that, too.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
I think you need to get your message out and your brand. And then I really like, and I appreciate the documents you put together, the halo lit. It's more subtle. I mean, it's in a summer day, the sun
Sure.
stays up late,
Sure.
but in the wintertime, it's going to stand out. People are going to see it, and it's a kind of a nice compromise between illuminated signage and a historic downtown.
Absolutely. And we're definitely willing to, and that's why we incorporated that alternative option. We wish we may have submitted it a little bit sooner to you guys, but, that's what the feedback was from last week. So, if that's the direction that, we're kind of preferring, that, that's something that we're definitely willing to do.
Right. I really appreciate that. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I know we talked a lot about the signage, but can we, on the exterior site review, so
Right.
just to be clear, you're the door is set in right now and you're bringing that out flush with the street?
Correct.
And I know, looking at the summary that Bethany so well put together, you said that has to happen for the interior to work?
Oh, yeah, we
Can you
have
explain
very
that?
minimal square footage on the inside, so we have a display that'll be sitting right up in the window. And if that interior, entrance was still a part of the store, it would really give us barely anything, maybe a vignette and a half, if that, to incorporate really what we're trying to incorporate with this location.
Okay.
I guess I just have concern with the doors opening out onto the sidewalk. I mean.
Oh, they're opening it. They open it.
They open in?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, do they? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Imagine the occupancy
Is
is
that
pretty
right?
low.
They
Yeah.
do? Okay, sorry if I missed
Yeah.
that.
No worries.
Other commissioners, other thoughts?
Back to the doors, so you're also, you would like to raise the windows 2 feet? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Correct. That's just kind of to restore that historic look from, the older images. You can kind of see
Yeah,
Oh, the brick is also not original for where that is right now. So something was manipulated at some point. We aren't really sure
see how
what.
tall even that corner was?
But it was, this area, I don't know, well, my mouse doesn't come through, but that is not the original brick of the building itself. Something was manipulated from the last 130 years.
It was pre-air conditioning, pre-HVAC.
Exactly.
It was a metal pan ceiling.
Exactly. There's a
couple
lot of
fans.
nooks and crannies in the building itself.
Could you put the turret back?
Oh, they're builders.
Hey, that would
If
be
you
your
guys
best
let us,
advertisement, okay?
if you let us go through tonight, I think we could figure something out.
Be careful what you say.
Yeah, I was gonna say, put that in the record.
Well, it'll be really nice. Next year, there's a celebration. It'll be Hinsdale's 150th anniversary.
Amazing.
So, be exciting.
That's fantastic.
Okay, I really appreciate it. Thank you
thank
for
you,
your
guys.
patience. With all that said, do I hear a motion to refer this back to the Historic Preservation Commission for consideration and then hopefully for our review at the September 14th Plan Commission meeting?
So moved. Cernovich?
We have a second?
Second, Curry?
You have a roll call vote, please, Bethany?
Commissioner Curry?
Aye.
Commissioner Cernovich?
Aye.
Commissioner Willoughby?
Aye.
Commissioner Fiasconi?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Chairman Cashman?
Aye. Tell your father, hope he gets better soon.
Appreciate
and, We'll see him in the future.
Absolutely, and I just wanted to ask one more question
Sure.
just while I have you guys. Just wanted to ask, and since we're here, is there any way that we could move forward with the actual storage in the glass, excluding the sign prior to, getting everything approved?
I mean, I talked about it with Bethany, but unfortunately, they're signing up for a combined packet, and we really can't separate the two. And I really would like just for my kind of, to make sure that we're doing this properly, is for HPC to consider that too. Because I know you did make some changes, but I want to make sure that that satisfies their needs and that the detail and everything looking forward is there too.
Thank you.
Sorry, but I know the lead times are not great now.
It's a everyday battle for us. So we're trying to get anything we can to keep our ball rolling and not play anything further.
All right, thanks, Nick. Nice to meet you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, our next order of business is a public hearing for case A-03-2022, a map amendment and text amendment to various sections of the zoning code and text amendment to Title 14 of the Village Code to establish a historic overlay district and for related amendments. And this is requested by our dear Village of Hinsdale. And first, I have a couple openings, and I'm going to let Bethany and the team chime in on this. I hope you watched a lot of those committee of the whole meetings.
Every single one.
Every single one. It was great to watch the evolution of the concept, and I really appreciate the joint effort by the HPC, the village, Rob, Michael, Bethany. I mean, the hours. I can't even imagine the hours, and how thoughtful you put together and how thorough. I mean, there's an awful lot of information in here. I mean, this is probably one of our larger packets that we get here, but it's extremely well done. I talked with Bethany. She's going to give like an overview. I think she put a PowerPoint together. She did some great PowerPoints for the HPC and for the village board. So it was just, it was nice to see that. When was the first meeting? I think it says in here, but it was
We do have a slide with that
May
information.
4th.
May 4th, yeah.
Yeah, so it was quite the undertaking, more than a year.
2021, right?
Right. And it really, I mean, I'd say it actually began before that. There seemed to be a lot of discussion and thoughts and before even that meeting. And I really appreciate what the trustees did and the HPC and the village. And I look forward to hearing you. And we have a full house. We're going to cut this meeting off at 10:30, regardless of what's going on. So we'll see how it goes. But thank you very much. It's amazing what you put together. So with that, I'll let Bethany give an overview. And do we swear everybody in?
Yeah, you can swear us in. Just us two.
Yeah.
And Rob if he comes back.
You need to be sworn that the testimony about him to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do. All right. Well, thank you, Chairman Cashman. That was a great introduction. Because of the amount of material we're going through today and the format and the open house that we have, packed house here, feel free to interject and ask questions along the way because it is quite a a long presentation compared to what we normally get here. So the intent of what we're talking about today is putting regulations together that's going to help incentivize preservation in Hinsdale. Obviously, this has been a decades-long concern that's come up over and over, and so in the past year and a half, we've spent quite a bit of time focusing on this. So before I go into actually what was included in your packet as proposed regulations, I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of the journey of how we got here today. So we have been spending the past year and a half doing what ended up in this packet, and that included 8 committee of the whole meetings where we had members of the Historic Preservation Commission, 2 of which are here today, and members of the village board before prior board meetings. That took about a year to do that. And then as part of that, in May of 2021, so last year, we also had a great Zoom meeting with several builders and architects in the village of Hinsdale. We tried to kind of figure out what realistically they thought was pushing homeowners to demolish homes instead of preserving them and go through these renovation or projects or build additions onto historic homes, and gain some realistic feedback on what might move that needle forward to push people towards preservation. So I know there's a lot of information on this slide, but I'm going to quickly go over it because I think it's important, and you'll see how some of these kind of tie in down the road of how we got to these regulations. So one of the biggest items of feedback that we heard is that our existing zoning code regulations are really limiting in terms of helping people build an addition onto a home and modernize a house. We'll kind of go into that a little bit further when we get to these alternative zoning regulations and why that is. But a lot of the time people are kind of being forced to go through this variation process because they can't get certain things by right, just by the non-conforming nature of our code. So it was recommended that because there's some challenges with the variation process and all the steps that entails, that whatever the village looks to approving down the road, it was recommended that we maybe look at an easy, streamlined process and limiting the number of hurdles that a homeowner might have to go through moving forward. We also heard that the variation process in general is a really scary process. People don't want to invest all this time, money, and energy into something that they might get objections from, or that they're might not end up getting approval. So one of the major things that came out of this was, because of all those issues, zoning relief by right or some sort of alternative regulations for historic homes may just help people be able to move their projects forward a little bit quicker. We also talked about identifying those actual buildings in the village that are really important to us and truly worth preserving. So part of that ties into the next one of creating education and awareness around historic preservation. What are the benefits of actually restoring a home, saving it, especially if we ended up getting preservation incentives, making sure that everyone knows that these exist, and then working with our real estate agents to make sure that when a house is listed, it's not just listed as a demolition, it's listed possibly as, this is a really cool building, and you might be eligible for a lot of things that you wouldn't get if you actually demolish it. And now I'm going to turn it over to Michael Mars, who's going to kind of go over what a historic overlay district is and the regulations that were included in Exhibit 1. So that was the item that actually had the actual ordinance language.
All right, thanks, Bethany. So after receiving that feedback from the architects and builders and some kicking around ideas with the village board, we started looking at various mechanisms for accomplishing some of those goals, including the types of incentives offered by other communities, both in Illinois and elsewhere. After we had an idea of the types of incentives that might be offered, we started looking at what amendments could be made to Title 14 of the Village Code concerning preservation, as well as the zoning code, in order to memorialize those purposes, goals, and incentives that the village board was interested in providing. So one of the challenges is that there are both preservation and zoning components to this. The zoning component is in the form of these relaxed bulk zoning standards for properties deemed to be historically significant. The idea being that if you're able to give these particular structures more flexibility to put on additions, to expand backwards, to expand sideways, there's less motivation theoretically for owners to tear them down and start from scratch, because they're able to modify it while still keeping the important facade elements and historic elements that we're interested in preserving. Another challenge was that these historically significant structures are anticipated to be located at various locations all around the village, not exclusive to your National Register historic districts. All right, so eventually we settled on this idea of creating a historic preservation overlay district. And so I want to talk for just a second about what an overlay district is. It's not a new zoning district. It's not replacing your R1, your R2, anything like that. It actually overlays those base districts. It lays on top of them. And in an overlay district, the existing base zoning regulations still apply, okay? But they are in some cases altered or modified by the overlay district regulations. And this isn't a new concept in Hinsdale. You have an existing title in your zoning code, Article 8, which is actually called overlay districts, and it includes regulations for the design review overlay district, which imposes additional design review standards and requirements in the area around Grow Mill. Okay, and also while it's not phrased as such, I view the longstanding zoning code provisions providing different bulk zoning standards for certain legal non-conforming lots of record and giving special consideration to pre-code structures. Those are in effect village-wide overlay districts, similar in concept to what we're proposing here, where certain properties are singled out for slightly different treatment from a zoning standpoint for a particular reason to achieve a particular purpose. So once we settled on the idea of a historic preservation overlay district, we mapped out the steps to creating it, which you will see in this slide here. Step one was creating the actual text of the chapter for both Title 14 regarding preservation and in the zoning code. The text which you have before you tonight includes the purposes, procedures, incentives, and standards relative to the district. As noted by Bethany, this has been a long process, but we feel that process has been important in reaching what we feel is a pretty good current product. Step two was determining the boundaries of the district. The idea here was to include within the overlay all areas of town where there might be a structure that would be deemed historically significant. That's reflected in the map included in your packet, and Bethany's going to go through that in a little more detail in a few minutes. Step three is where we are now, which is this public hearing regarding the creation of the overlay district, the recommendations from you on the map and on the text amendments. Okay, and step four will come after board approval of the map and text, and that involves creation by the HPC of a proposed list of historically significant properties that will be eligible for these voluntary incentives, and I'll talk more about that process in a minute. And finally, step five, once we've accomplished all that, once these text amendments are in place, the map is created, the historically significant structures property list is created. If you're an owner of a property on that list, that owner is eligible on a voluntary basis to request various of the provided incentives through an application and review process. Okay, let's show the map real quick. There we go. So we've got the map in here a couple times, but we included quite a bit of the community because, again, we don't want to miss an area where there might be a historically significant structure. And so there's actually more of the village included than not. And that's fine, and they don't have to be contiguous, but we just wanted to cast a broad net and make sure we weren't leaving anything out so that we didn't have to go back and amend it, in the near future. And before we talk about, before I turn it back over to Bethany to talk about the various incentives and other aspects, I want to talk a little bit about creation of the historically significant structures property list, which is going to be this next step in the process. So once this body makes a recommendation and the board enacts the text amendments and overlay district map boundaries, the clock will start ticking for the HPC. They've got 180 days under the proposal to create this initial list of properties for placement on the list. And essentially, we're looking at the universe of buildings in the village and saying that these are the ones that we want to prioritize preserving through the incentives being offered. Nothing we're doing today will stop anyone from tearing down a home if they ultimately want to, but the hope is that these changes will at least give them pause and make it more practical to preserve an existing significant home instead of tearing it down. All right, so let's look at the steps. We're gonna, notify if a home is proposed to be on the list. Nope, I think we skipped one, didn't we?
This one.
Yep. HPC is going to create an initial list within 180 days. And then they're going to hold a public hearing regarding the placement of properties on that list. If the list is voluminous, we might break it up because they are going to notify owners. Those owners will have an opportunity to come. Given that there's only benefits and no real negative to being on the list, we wouldn't anticipate a lot of people. But we may have somebody who says, I'm wary of this, I don't want to be part of it, and that could be taken into account. But we'll send notice to those people. They'll come to the public hearing, and the HPC is going to talk individually about these homes, probably briefly in most cases. Just why is this significant? Why should it be on the list? Make a recommendation as to whether it's going to be on the list, and that list of recommendations in the initial list will go to the board, who will then, give final approval to it. There is an opportunity under the ordinance for properties to later be added to the list. So our hope is, let's say the initial universe is 50 homes. These are the 50 really significant properties. We want to make sure these incentives are available to. If the program goes well, you can anticipate that there may be more people coming in. Hey, I want that tax break. I want the opportunity for those matching funds. And so there's a process by which people can propose, or the HPC or the board can propose additional properties to be added to the list as we go along. And that follows a similar, public hearing process and just a review by the HPC and a recommendation to the board. Okay, so after we have created the list and everything's in place, it doesn't quite stop there. We want to increase the chance that this project will be effective. So the ordinance provides that these important steps will happen after its creation, where the owners of the property on the list will be notified their home is on the list. They've already received a notice of the public hearing, so they're aware that they were under consideration. List will be made available on the village's website, will be provided to area realtors, to the news media, and other persons or entities as necessary in an effort to publicize the list and the incentives that are available. Another thing that is required by the ordinance is a notice regarding it being a historically significant structure will be recorded against title of the property, with the idea that someone buying the property will see that on their title report and hopefully explore what the incentives may be able to provide them relative to preservation of the home. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Bethany for more in-depth discussion of the incentives.
Are there any questions so far? Should we take a break? Okay, we'll keep going.
Mark?
Yeah, just on, before that notification goes out, is there a way to get the message out more that there's positive aspects? I just
can't hear you.
Sorry, I'll lean forward. With regard to the notification process, before they get sent that letter, is there a way?
Initial letter.
Yeah, way to publicize, to what you're saying, I agree with the news media, all that. But I think there's a step before that, so we don't get bombarded at meetings with the people that are thinking of the moratorium and all of that, that they're, this, like you said, wary, trying to squash some of that, from a PR perspective.
And we've had discussions internally as well. This is a voluntary program, right? So if someone is so opposed that this is going to be tied to their house and they absolutely don't want to be involved in it, I mean, then we won't pursue that further, most likely.
I agree with that.
But you're right, we have had discussions about publicizing this program more, working with the Hinsdalean, contacting a lot of real estate agents, and making sure the word is out there about what this program actually would mean.
Yeah, I think that just needs to happen before that letter
Yeah,
goes
some
out.
full-page
Agreed.
ads
Yeah,
before.
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, because anybody that sees it's going against title, they freak out, right?
Yes, exactly.
When it's really nothing bad.
Yeah.
Right.
It's only benefit.
It's this, the whole point of that was just to make sure people know that this exists.
Right.
And I think there are some other communities that do this for more of like landmarking purposes and other programs, but it's just a FYI. That was the intent of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm all for as much publicity as you can generate, whether it's a town hall meeting or a workshop where people are available to answer questions or whatever forum you
Right.
can get, story in the Hinsdalean, however we can do it. But I agree, it's important to emphasize the fact that it's voluntary and that there's only benefits to it.
Yeah, no, I just, and that's the timing, as it relates to the letter, I could just picture somebody getting
Yep.
that letter.
Yes.
Okay, what's the village up to now?
Right, and so one of the ways also that we could address that is, I talked about breaking up the public hearing, so you could have, okay, our first universe is only going to be these 20 houses, they're already mostly landmarked, these people are on board with preservation, so kind of roll it out in a way that gets the ball rolling and maybe gets some attention placed on it with people who are going to receive it
And that word
positively.
of mouth and,
Yep.
yeah, I agree with that. Yep. Okay, thank you.
May I recall, I think Bethany, you or Rob shared with me that you want to create a list that people want to be on.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Yep. That's the whole intent here of it definitely is something that we want people to be dying to get on, where we can't keep up with the number of people. And even with the limited publicity that we've done at this point, as we've kind of been forming all these regulations, we have quite a few homeowners that are actually interested in this program already. So once again, there's going to be people that absolutely want nothing to do with it, but I think we're pretty positive that, given the slew of stuff that we're going to talk about in a second, it's a pretty great program, and it will afford a lot to whomever wants to be involved.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to quickly talk about Exhibit 3, which was included in your packet. So this was the proposed historic overlay district. And kind of Michael alluded to this of how we got to this map, is we kind of did process of elimination. We really wanted to make sure that we weren't just catching homes in Robbins Park. We weren't just catching commercial and residential. We were trying to figure out a way, how do we kind of incorporate the whole village and get the larger areas, but also make sure that we're not including everything that isn't applicable. So what we've done for right now, based on a preliminary analysis, is we've excluded the O3 office district. So that's that pink area up on Ogden and York. We excluded the B3 district. That's the dark blue area, which is also adjacent to Ogden, and then the Tollway, and then there's a couple of other select sites. And then the R5 and R6 districts, which are multifamily districts, those are kind of in those purpley colors, and they're kind of scattered around. And it did not look like any of those had historic buildings of significance to the village as of right now. We've included the R1, R2, R3, and R4 single-family districts, and the B1 and B2 business districts, the O1 and O2 office districts, the IB institutional district, the HS hospital, I think, district, and the OS open space district. So it's not to say that every single property within these large areas is significant by any means, and it's not to say that whether you're included in the historic overlay means you're going to be on the historically significant structures property list. There's, like we talked about, a separate process for that. So anyone who thinks they're possibly eligible right now just because this map is created has still a little bit more to go. And then we did discuss before this meeting, we probably are going to make some, because we know that this map right now is a little bit hard to read. We might visually make some graphical changes, but generally, unless there's any other recommendations by the Plan Commission or the Village Board, we would keep the same areas, but we might make it a little bit easier to look at for the public down the road. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about the actual preservation incentives for tonight. I'm going to try to keep this high level. There's a lot here as well, but like I said, feel free to jump in. So as we talked about, these are voluntary incentives. If a house was listed on the historically significant properties list, they would not be required to take advantage of these. The first one that I'm going to talk about a little bit further is our alternative zoning regulations, and this would only apply to the single-family zoning districts. We also have 3 different financial incentives. One is a grant program, one is a fee waiver program, and one is a property tax rebate for the village portion only of the property tax bill. And then we also are offering expedited processing, particularly where this is going to matter is for building permits. And we have we can either do some of those in-house, or we have the ability to send them out to a third party. So before I talk about these incentives specifically, I just want to talk about the overall approval process. So if a home is already on the historically significant structures property list, once that list is determined, we have kind of 2 separate routes to go. No matter what, every application is going to need to get approval of what we're calling a preservation incentive certificate. Right now, if you're going through the Historic Preservation Commission process, you get a certificate of appropriateness. This is going to kind of be the same sort of thing, but for the incentive side. So if you're just requesting a permit fee waiver or an alternative zoning regulation, we are proposing that this would be for final authority with the Historic Preservation Commission. And then if they granted approval, subject to the review, we would then be able to issue a building permit and move forward with that incentive. If an applicant is requesting a grant or a property tax rebate, because this is a larger financial incentive, we've kind of left this decision up with the board. So we're making the Historic Preservation Commission the recommending body. They're still going to use the same standards for review, but it would move to the board for final authority. And this is largely because of the financial aspect of it.
I have a question on that.
Yep.
I read in here that you can accept private funds for there's obviously a max and there's a whole budgeting process you guys are doing, but can somebody, if they're fundraising for something or whatever to go towards this budget, can they tag it for a specific property? Or does it just go to a fund? I mean, it obviously doesn't matter because there's a max of what they can get, but if the budget's not there, can they, and they want to do a save a house, right? And can they say, we're fundraising this money for this house?
That's a good question.
So I can't say 100%, but generally, if somebody is going to make a donation to the village, and once the village receives that money, it's going to go in the Historic Preservation Fund. If that money has conditions on it, then the village, in order to accept that money, would probably have to accept those conditions. So I'm going to preliminarily say that would be possible.
Just thought.
And it's interesting, yeah, and that may well come up, that there's a movement to save a particular house, and we want to generate these funds and get them into the system so that these incentives can be provided to the owner of that house, but make sure that money makes it to it, and I think we could make that happen.
That's a great question.
Good question.
And I'll get into the Historic Preservation Fund a slight bit more a little bit later, but that fund is also eligible for doing special projects too. So one of the things that I'm not sure if you're aware and that you've seen in the Robbins Park Historic District is the HPC has been going through, and we have new sign toppers in the whole district. So on each individual intersection. And so things like that, where it could be like a larger preservation effort of historic signage, or maybe historic preservation plan, or code amendments, or design standards, things that kind of can affect the village at large, that's also something that funding could be used for. So say there is someone who also wants a larger thing funded, that's something that we might be able to look into as well.
And I think we talked about studies also.
Yep.
Utilizing the money for,
Feasibility and assessment
feasibility studies, surveys of historic properties in the village. So we tried to put a catch-all in there that would be pretty broad for historic preservation purposes.
Okay, so the reason I'm putting this slide after our approval process is because if you go back to the beginning of the PowerPoint presentation, when I said we got so much feedback that everyone wants a smooth, easy, streamlined process with absolutely no hoops that anyone has to jump through. But obviously, we do have an approval process here, and I kind of want to explain why that approval process is here. So there are, in Exhibit 6, I believe, we had included the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. And these are kind of the basic historic preservation principles out in the world, like the gold standard of best general preservation practices. And so as much as staff acknowledges that we would like to have the most easiest process, there is still a reason why the HPC should be reviewing these. And it's to make sure that the whole purpose of this is historic preservation, and we just want to make sure that the basic standards are being met for our historic preservation goals. The HPC has a lot of, as you guys know, because you get their projects later down the road, has a lot of good expertise to provide to projects, and it's really critical that they're making sure that historic preservation is actually occurring with these cases. So I've included some slides from previous Committee of the Whole presentations where these are good examples, happy buildings where we have nice, additions, even if they're modern, that are kind of fitting into the design of the building, and they meet good preservation standards. And then we have, really bad examples where, someone's kind of just putting an entire building behind a weird facade and pasting it on. And so we really need the HPC there to say, no, you're actually demolishing this whole building, and then you're requesting a ton of money from us or rezoning relief, and that's not really a great preservation project. I will also say that this process is still much easier than most zoning entitlement processes, like a variation or even some of the zoning approvals that come here. So it still is a really beneficial, easy process that we've tried to make it. Okay, so I'm really quickly going to go into each of these again. The proposed reservation incentives, and I'm going to start with the alternative zoning regulations. I'm going to try to keep this high level because explaining our zoning code to people is the most challenging, I think, job you can have. But I just want to kind of go into how we got to these as well. So the feedback we got, obviously, was that our zoning codes acts as a hindrance for people putting on any sort of building additions or any modern improvements here. We get complaints all the time that historic homes don't have the large kitchens, the open concept plan, and you need to, expand the building envelope to actually accommodate the additional needs of a modern family. The disadvantage that we have in this village for our historic buildings is that a lot of the lots that they're on and a lot of the structures themselves are non-conforming. So when they were originally created, they were legal with the code requirements then. But as our code changed and was adopted later, and there were new code requirements, those houses are no longer conforming with our current code requirements. So unfortunately, they were legal once, they have a hard time now, and then expanding upon those makes it a little bit more challenging. The other thing that is a little strange for things like floor area ratio, historic homes were just built different than the way our definition is now. So a new home can kind of manipulate that floor area ratio, for example, but an old home is kind of given what it has, and it's already at a disadvantage in cases like that. So what we tried to do, so before I move on, just as a reminder, these alternative zoning regulations that we're going to talk about are only for our single-family zoning districts. As of right now, we haven't looked at any of our commercial or office districts, anything in the downtown, and so this is just for single-family homes primarily. So we looked at our existing, and this was in these sections, these primary sections that we're going to talk about. These were included in Exhibit 4 of the packet. These are the primary sections that relate to single-family homes in the village. So Section 110, that includes the general bulk requirements for homes in the single-family zoning districts. Section 10104 deals with what we call pre-code structures. These are non-conforming structures, the ones built prior to the adoption of our new code. And then we have Section 10105, legal non-conforming lots. So the lots don't meet our general standard and bulk requirements for size. And then our definitions, we have various definitions that have included as well. So we looked at these regulations and kind of assessed what could help. We looked at past variation cases, what people have dealt with in the past, and we based our new code, which is shown in this table, which is going to be incredibly hard to read on that slide, based on those regulations. So we are providing some minor relief based on how those code requirements are, and tried to make something that's a little bit more user-friendly. I don't know if anyone went and read the entire zoning code, but something that's a little bit more user-friendly than the regulations that we have now. So this table actually provides only minimum relief, and I'm going to go through at least 2 examples that were included in the packet. So it's not like we're throwing out the entire code book, and you'll see in many cases we're only gaining a little bit here in terms of setbacks, But I think these are hopefully regulations that are going to be able to tip over, encouraging someone to get a little bit more than what they could for new construction, and really give them that great building addition or certain aspects that'll help them modernize a home, something that they wouldn't be able to get otherwise with new construction. So the first thing we looked at was building height. And
Can I stop you just for a second?
Yes.
In the packet, this is right near the end of Exhibit 4. It's a few pages forward from the back. There's a nice table you put in here where you have the R1 to R4 existing, and then you have 2 columns that show the proposed, and it's just kind of a nice way to see it side by side.
And that's the Exhibit 5, right?
Oh, yes, pardon me, it's Exhibit 5.
So that's page 3 on Exhibit 5.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Okay, okay. The bookmark goes from 4 to 6, so it's a 5. Yeah, but I think that's a really nice summary. I know Rob was really trying to get the FAR back in there, but.
Yeah, and imagine putting that table on this slide. We tried to make it a little simpler because you can't
Thanks.
even read this side very well. Well, so the first thing that we did was we looked at building height and got rid of that and are just focusing on building elevation. The biggest thing here that you need to know is that any building additions, any changes to the building, you would not be able to exceed the highest ridge line that already exists for that building. So if you're building an addition, it can't be 2 stories taller than what you already have. Basically, if you're looking at a mass of the building, it's not going to be much taller. It can't be any taller than what we're currently having. That kind of is controlling that bulk and scale that we want to make sure it fits into the neighborhood.
Okay.
We also have included provisions here about lot area and dimensions. We don't want anyone to think that they're going to all of a sudden start subdividing lots off and making them smaller and gaining in that way. So we've included some language that lot sizes are going to remain the same. For front yards, we've pretty much kept this along with our code requirements, and actually, in this case, made it a little bit more strict. Right now, front yards are based on block average, so the average of basically how everyone on your block, their front yards. In this case, we have added a good preservation practice here of making sure that if someone wants to do a front building addition, that's not good preservation practice by the pictures I showed you guys earlier, right? We're trying to restore and preserve the front facade, so a front building addition doesn't make sense. So you cannot exceed past that front facade as is right now.
Question, Bethany, what about a front porch?
For front porch, there would be separate regulations for like an accessory thing. One thing that you don't see here is that if you go to Exhibit 4, this is our current code requirements. And one of the fun parts about our current code requirements is that subsection I of section 3-110 has 1,000,000 footnotes. And these footnotes generally are still applying. So there is, for example, like some language here on, what can be required in specified structures and uses and required yards. And I believe front porches is part of that.
That's D, I think.
Covered unenclosed porches,
Yes.
yep. So we can go back and make sure that that will not be an issue.
Okay. Thank you. I know a lot of the older homes do have the front porch, and I think, wasn't there a house on Garfield where they had to go in front of the ZBA just to replace their front porch?
Yes.
We'll look into that case and make sure that there's no
But that was well
conflicts.
into the required front yard already.
It was, well, okay. But I know it's one of the oldest homes in Hinsdale, too, I believe, Civil
Right.
War.
Yeah, that was part of the problem, is it was so close already that
Mm-hmm.
that exception didn't help them in that case.
Okay.
I
Because I
think-
think there's another one next to it where that might happen, too, so.
Yeah,
Want to make sure that a front addition is sympathetic to the rest of
Yes.
the house, that it's not
Yes.
forward of that porch.
right. And it's also, if, for example, you had an existing porch and you needed to rebuild it, you're hopefully not gonna rebuild it 20 feet in front of the existing
Yes.
porch.
Right.
Because that, once again, doesn't meet our good preservation practices.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes, but we'll make sure that that language doesn't create any conflicts down the road. For side yards, if you per our, existing pre-code structure, so anything that was built prior to the code that no longer meets standards, we've basically kept the exact same minimums that is currently in our code requirement. The only difference is currently we have language in there that talks about whatever is greater is the minimum setback in terms of if you have an existing house that doesn't meet that setback requirement and you have, for example, 10 feet as this, minimum code requirement, and that house is at 13 feet, you still have to go with the 13 feet because it's whatever is greater. So you're kind of stuck with your existing setback, and now we're just going directly to whatever our minimum already is, which is already in the code. So it's not a great deviation, but it will give people a couple extra feet. And I'll once again show examples in a little bit.
I have another question, sorry. What is the date for the code? What date are we looking at?
For
When
when
you're talking like pre-code or,
Yep, so our code was adopted in 1989, and I believe in our non-conforming definition, it talks about buildings before a certain date in 1988.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's written in the definition. And then the biggest thing that I think is going to actually help people here is what we are proposing for rear yards. So right now, if you had a non-conforming rear yard, you cannot extend, further into it, whether you have a lot of space or not. And I'll show an example of that. So we've kind of allowed for a reduction to the required rear yard so that we can fit in these rear additions. This would, allow people to encroach further back, but we still have these minimums in place. And then we have waived floor area ratio, and we're pretty confident that this is not going to be a major issue for these homes. We still have building elevation, lot coverage, building coverage, these other tools to make sure that no one's going to be building a giant, massive, bulky building. We are not proposing any changes to building coverage as of right now. We didn't find any cases that really justified that as of current. And then we are increasing, we're proposing to increase lot coverage by 10%, subject to no adverse impacts on adjacent properties.
Is that total lot coverage?
That would be total lot coverage, yep. Okay, so in your packet, in Exhibit 5, we did include four separate examples of how these will change setbacks for homes. I'm only going to go over 2 for the sake of time, but feel free to ask questions on any of them. One of the properties that we looked at is 308 East First Street. This is both a non-conforming lot in the R1 district and a non-conforming structure, so it's a pre-code structure. So it'd be subject to both 10-104 and 10-103 of our code requirements. So when we looked at how the setbacks would require or would change, the red lines that you can see up there, that's the existing required setbacks. And then the blue lines are how much they gain in terms of these proposed regulations. So you can see in this example here, we're not throwing the code book out. It's pretty minimal relief, but we do think in a lot of cases, especially in the next one I'm going to talk about, it can make a substantial difference. So in the case of this home, nothing really changes as we talked about with the front yard. They're not going to be able to do any sort of encroachment with a building addition further towards First Street, which is on the north side of this home, based on the way we're looking right now.
Right.
In that corner side yard on Elm Street, they do gain a couple of feet, maybe 2.6 feet with the corner side yard. But I mean, it's the corner side yard. There's not much you can really do in terms of that right now. It doesn't give you that much relief. Where they really do gain is the rear yard. With these new regulations, they're going to gain about 8.5 feet. And currently right now, based on our code requirements, they're not even meeting the rear yard right now. So that required rear yard is in the building technically right now. And then with their interior side yard, they're gaining about 5.7 feet. So it does give them a little bit of leeway here. And then with those other bulk requirements that I just talked about factored in, that could make a really big difference for this house if you needed to retrofit it, do an interior addition there. One of the houses that we have talked about extensively last year was 420 South Park. There were some concerns that this house actually was going to be a demolition. It was on the market for a very long time, and we're lucky that we do have someone who purchased it and is working to modernize it and restore it. But we did look at this house particularly a lot because of the fears of demolition and how do we help this house. So this house is also the same, non-conforming structure and a non-conforming lot. And so one of the questions that we kept getting asked is, can I put a building addition or an attached garage on the south side of that building? And there really wasn't enough room, especially for a garage, to fit enough area for 2 cars to actually fit there. And so we looked at, a lot of how this regulation could happen. In this case, with the proposed regulations applied, we're gaining about 7.2 feet on the interior side yard, so that north side of the building, which is currently non-conforming, the side yard's on top of the building, like I said. And the rear yard gets about 10.45 feet. So we're gaining with all of this around it. Realistically, the non-conforming coach house isn't made any better. It's still non-compliant, but we're gaining enough room here to put in an actual building addition if needed. And especially in this case, one of the comments we got was, how do I put in an attached garage here? Any questions so far? Okay, everyone's still awake, good.
I had one question about side yards. 10 feet, what if one of the side yards is not 10 feet?
Existing?
Existing, non-conforming.
They would still be held to the 10 feet. You wouldn't be able to go, so you're saying if their existing side yard was 5 feet, and the code is requiring 10 feet, they're not allowed to build to the 5 feet, the existing.
Right.
We've set it at that 10 feet.
But they could, on the other side, go 10 feet? They wouldn't be penalized because the one side is non-conforming?
No, so what you're talking about is our current code has this weird balancing effect with side yards.
Yes.
So anyone who loves our code loves this section. So so it does have a balancing effect where you kind of have to justify a larger side
Yes.
yard, so they're not quite even. That's not taken into consideration here.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd be even and flat. We're not doing the balancing act.
I'm also thinking back to ZBA many years ago, so this is going to make things much simpler.
Yep. And one thing to point out as well, it's not like we still have a great Historic Preservation Commission to review these exterior changes.
Yes.
And, we've got some great architects, we've got some great people who understand preservation. So if something looks a little off, their comments will be heard. So there is still a review process for
Okay.
this very reason.
Thank you.
Okay, and then finally, I'm just going to quickly go over our financial incentives. We kind of touched base on the Historic Preservation Fund and matching grants previously. Exhibit 7 was included in your packet, and that was a revised kind of preliminary financial breakdown of some of these programs that we had previously reviewed for a committee of the whole meeting. The Preservation Fund matching grants, so as of right now, the way we have it set up, we would be funding, the village would help fund for a specific exterior improvements or a broad range of preservation activities like we talked about. 50% of those eligible costs by up to $10,000, but the applicant would need to have a project of $20,000. So the village would pay for 50% of that $20,000, meaning that there's a $10,000 share. It doesn't by any means mean that a project needs to cost $20,000. We can also look at separate smaller grants or other smaller projects. So if a project was $10,000, the village's matching share would be $5,000. And as we talked about, this is going to be contingent and based on the budget every year or through private donations and assistance that way. Oops. The other thing that we talked about is fee waivers. This would largely be for permits. That's the biggest thing that I think this would financially allow people to assist with. I think I've been talking too much. And potentially some zoning relief as well. So for those zoning applications. Excuse me. And then the third one is for the property tax rebate. And like I said, this is for the village portion, and it would potentially be for substantial exterior improvements That would have a cost of $50,000 at a minimum and up for a maximum of a 5-year period. Excuse me. And then, as we discussed, there's eligible costs. For exterior construction work, there's quite a bit that's not eligible, like general routine maintenance, landscaping, fencing. If someone wanted to build a new detached garage, but it wasn't, for example, a historic coach house or any other interior work. And then we did include a couple of additional amendments. There's some cross-referencing and sectioning of the code, just some minor stuff. And then we did include some bolstering language in our variation standards so that we're supporting variations in cases where someone still does need to move forward with a variation. The intent of these codes is not to fix every case, right? We're trying to provide relief and incentivize preservation, but we know that there are still going to be unique cases where a variation is going to be needed. So we wanted to make sure that there's some additional language that bolsters and supports those projects.
And can I just insert, so in terms of the additional language in the variation standards, so, I mean, from a practical standpoint, I think the ZBA is cognizant of the fact that, we don't want to be so strict with the code that we're causing people to tear down a historic structure. So they're already probably mentally taking that into account, but putting it explicitly in there that we should give a specific consideration to historic structures and preservation gives them something to hang their hat on, and were it to be challenged for a court to hang their hat on as well. So
That's really good, especially with, somebody could argue that it's self-created. I think they're always up against that, so I think that's very helpful.
And that's all I have for right now.
That's all?
That's all. So we're happy to answer any questions. I know this is a lot to digest. There was a lot in this packet. But like I said, it's been a year and a half of getting to this point. We're very proud of all the work that went into this. And we're hoping that this does shift the needle forward. I know there are several homeowners I've talked to who are really excited about this program. And we do think it is definitely going to help with helping people preserve the house and show that the village is here to support those preservation efforts.
Thanks, Bethany. Thanks, Michael.
So just to confirm, it's all exterior for all the incentives, yes?
Correct.
So fee waivers and all that?
Yes.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because imagine if someone wanted to put in a gold-plated bathroom on the inside of their home, and we don't want the village and taxpayer money to be going towards that, because it really is the preservation of the exterior home. But that's one part that everyone needs to be aware of. Any interior work is not really going to be submitted for review by the HPC. That's all interior. It's not part of our purview here. We are strictly dealing with the exterior of the home.
Thank you.
which is the same as any landmark structure. So
Yep.
landmarking is concerned with the exterior look of something.
Scott, any questions, comments?
I know this is gonna sound crazy. But is this enough? In other words, everybody's looking at the arbitrage between knocking a house down and getting incentives to get people to not do it. Are we going far enough? Do we, mathematically, financially, and space-wise? And I know a ton of work has gone into that. What's the thought process on that, and what are the constraints that have been faced as far as going any further? Yeah, that would be my driving question.
That's a good question, because we've gone back and forth and asked the same question several times of, is this zoning going to be enough? And the truth is, especially for the financial side, that's actually easier to track, the financial aspects of it. The zoning side, I think, is a little trickier, and we're just not going to know until we see if people are applying and kind of engaging with people of is this working? And the truth is we can always go back and amend these regulations later, especially if all of a sudden we start seeing new cases pop up at variation or ZBA, right? We can always, and we did analyze a lot of ZBA cases as part of this as well. Those ones are a little bit more challenging because there's a lot of unique situations that we couldn't just wrap up into a nice bow. But as things come up, we would like to reassess as we move along and see what's working.
The point that you made, my fellow commissioner made,
Can you speak into the mic, please?
excuse me, the point that Mrs. Viasconi made is incredibly important because there's tax ramifications to somebody donating money. And if they're donating money to their own project and then they see that possibly able to come back to them or a portion of it come back to them, that's a huge incentive that I think you've raised that is brilliant. And
I don't think I meant for it to be brilliant, but.
no, I think
Brilliance works.
That's
I think it
right.
really was, and I think it's a very interesting concept that I hope you all on the committee think about and take into consideration, because it might actually make the financial incentive even greater. And then, thank you, right? Thank you for all the work that's gone into this. It's just absolutely incredible how much time has been spent and the materials, and you explained it very well, so thank you.
I know it was a long time, so
No,
thank
no,
you
no,
for
no.
your patience.
It was very well done. I do have some other questions and stuff, but I'll yield for now.
Anna?
My questions have been answered. You answered it, my question regarding, just reassessing the numbers and the amounts. I'm sure you came to that number, had a lot of discussion about it. But that's something that, as we've seen just over the past couple years, how much building costs have increased. So, is 50,000 going to be enough? Is 70,000 going to be enough? That sort of thing. So, just something to assess yearly or whatnot.
Mark?
First, thank you. A lot of great work. You guys did a great job. Similar to Scott, I mean, I know you guys looked at a lot of great examples in, like you said, in Illinois and others. That was kind of my question. What's the uptake of those programs been? And you can have a lot of great code, but if nobody's taking advantage of it. So that was kind of same question there. The other question, did you circle back with the architects and builders that you met with on some of them on this, as far as after you met with them and learned their concerns? Have we?
So there's been ongoing engagement.
Okay.
So we had this Zoom call, right?
Yeah.
When this started during the pandemic.
Yeah.
With, our regulars, right?
Yeah.
The real estate, agents, the builders, the architects. And it was really an open-ended question, is, guys, what's it gonna take to try and move the needle? So we're hoping, and there's been ongoing engagement. So hopefully, collectively, this palette of incentives that we're able to offer is gonna save a house. We don't know that yet. We don't know what the impact's gonna be. But what we heard over and over again was, we wanna try, if somebody's gonna spend $2 million renovating a house, they wanna remove as many question marks before they go to contract as they can. So this is our best shot at removing as many of those questions, as many of those objections on the front end as possible.
And to go back to the comments that were made earlier today, we, I think, completely understand that there's a lot of publicizing to do after. So going back out, if this is approved, reaching out back out to those developers, those architects, making sure everyone's aware, and especially the real estate agents. That's something that we've talked about consistently, of they're the ones advertising these homes to be demolished, or can give my card to them, or give this material, this packet to the future homeowners, or send them to the link that we have on our website. There's a lot of ways that we want to make sure the word gets out there so that everyone's aware of what's possible.
That's all I had, Steve. Thank you.
I have another question. If I may. The way that you have done the graphs to show the difference in the zoning and the financial incentives on the properties, is that something that, as these initial 25 or 50 are done, is that going to be part of what's done for them to be approved? In other words, is that level of work going to be done so it's easily given to the homeowner and easily given to a buyer?
So like,
Because I know that's a lot of work.
we've already done this on a couple of occasions for people. And actually, in this case, too. The 420 South Park is what started a lot of this, too.
We did some of these early.
Yeah.
As soon as we heard that Park was coming on the
Yeah.
market, staff worked to see what we could do
That's
to
great.
try and
Yeah.
Yeah.
help people save the house.
Yeah.
Right,
You know,
that and
where can we
the-
get a garage to fit?
Yeah.
What can we do with a family room on the rear?
Yeah. Our zoning code regulations are complex sometimes, so we're always happy to help people meander through that and tell them what they can do.
Right. Just thinking it might be part of the process, part of your flow chart as things are done.
Yep.
So,
I think, Julie?
I would like to commend staff, Bethany, and Historic Preservation Commission, and the trustees for meeting so many times to discuss this, and I think it was very helpful to do just an hour's worth at a time, because it is a lot of information. So it takes a while for all this to sink in. But this is all very positive. I do have a couple questions. How many homes have been demolished in Hinsdale? Do you have any idea, like percentage-wise?
We demolished at least a third.
At least a third,
Yeah,
closer to a half,
over
maybe?
Probably a 25-year span. So my predecessor was pretty good at tracking. So we started in, I think, like 69 with the first. And every year, I mean, we peaked out at about 120, and then we've kind of fallen off like the 40, 50 range. But I think we've replaced a third in less than 30 years.
The first village meeting I ever attended was, I don't know how many years ago, but it was about when they wanted to have a moratorium on demolitions. And it was basically historic people who wanted to preserve the homes in Hinsdale against the builders. And it was not a pleasant meeting. I wish that something like this would have been in place back then, but better now than never. I think there's great incentives here, waiver of fees, the setbacks I think that's huge. And you've made this where it's simple. I think your average resident can understand this rather than unlike our zoning code. People always have so many questions and need help with. So I think that's great. What other communities have something similar to this? Is that hard to say?
One of the committee of the whole meetings, and Michael Mars did do a presentation on this, was about, some other communities and overlay districts with historic aspects to it. But there's nothing exactly like this, but there are places where they do incentives for historic homes and zoning or grant programs, so we're kind of taking a unique approach, but a little bit different than other communities, because we're not like other communities. We have a slew of issues and higher property values, I think, than some of the
Yes.
other ones that we've looked at.
And being
So
non-home
we've had to
rule.
tailor a little bit of our efforts, I think, differently.
Yeah, one of the fun things about this project, at least for zoning geeks like Bethany and I, is that there wasn't really a template that we could follow that we
Right.
found from other communities. So we kind of fashioned this from the ground up using ideas that we took from other communities. But so often my firm's been around doing local government law for 90 years, and we can almost always we've always done something before and have a template, but this wasn't really that way. So it was interesting to kind of build this piece by piece. And so I think it's a unique program that one of the things, if it's successful, I think that the village could, leverage this for some publicity with preservation groups and things like that, because I think there might be other communities that would be interested in implementing something similar. There's a lot of communities that have incentives, but they're just not structured this way.
It's different though.
Yep.
And I recall one of the meetings, one of the committee of the whole meetings, somebody brought up, okay, you're going to offer incentives, but will this include anything about demolitions by neglect? Or, there's been a lot of problems with that in the past. Is that going to stay the same, or will something be added? It seems like there's a lot of repeat offenders destroying a lot of the historic homes in Hinsdale.
So when we originally started talking about this about a year and a half ago, we had some initial provisions with demolition by neglect that we were discussing, and we've decided to separate that for right now. We went with focusing on the voluntary preservation incentives, and I think after we get through this period, that will be the next discussion that will be coming shortly after. But we wanted to separate the carrots and the sticks for this portion.
Right, and I understand that. I just think the code could be stricter about the demolition by neglect, or too many people know how to work around it. I'm not going to
Right.
bring up the cases, but you know what I'm talking about. It's,
I agree. There are, you know, as Bethany said, we have some initial draft language. I think it's something that does need to be addressed in the short term. It's just not part of this.
that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Cynthia?
So much has been addressed that I was going to say, and kudos to all of you. The hours are evident in all of this, and thank you for simplifying it enough that, you know, it's understandable enough. And again, like everyone, I think education is paramount to get the word out to these people, however you do it. Is it a marketing campaign? Is it broadcasting? Is it news? Is it, you know, we're a village taking steps. Lots of towns are going through the same issue. I was talking to someone the other day, Santa Fe. They're trying desperately to preserve an area, the downtown area, because people are ripping buildings down like crazy. So making sure that we're letting the people know this is a really good thing, like you said, to be on this list. And then trying to stop the builders who are coming in and picking up lots and tearing them down because they want to build houses. They don't want to fix them. But I think everything you've done is remarkable. Thank you.
I think you did an amazing job. It was, such a nice cooperative effort between the village, HPC, all the time and effort to deal with our code, which is, quite tangled. I think it seems very common sense in a way. I was kind of curious, Rob, when you had that meeting, and that was a great group of people to bring together, were there specific parts of the zoning ordinance that were their first things that they're like, what about this FAR? I always thought, and just looking at preservation, especially some of these old lots that are just odd lots and where the house is positioned, that the rear yard was like the place where you really need to give relief. Because, if you're a neighbor, or just someone driving by, you don't really care what you do with your rear yard, so much as, front yard, side, and all that. So I thought it was great, the changes you made there. Building height, I thought that was another area where we got this, some of our oldest, most beautiful buildings, our houses, they're quite tall.
Yep.
And this idea that we were so hung up on that for so long. But did they have specific areas they were going to?
I think part of it was, the rear setback, and I know that was one of John's issues.
Yeah, I remember John
early
talking
on,
about
is
old
that,
houses,
these
family
houses,
rooms, right?
Yeah, they don't have that open
Right.
floor plan. They need some room in the rear. FAR came up as an issue. A lot of these houses already violate that height, like you talked
Right.
about, where we've got, a lot of these older, farmhouse styles. You're already, blowing height before
Right.
you ever get started.
Right.
So, probably the comment that resonated most was trying to remove as many questions as possible.
Okay.
Not that, we're never gonna set up a system where you, replace the ZBA, or you no longer need a
Right.
ZBA. You're always gonna need a zoning board of appeals, because you're always gonna have that one-off that we didn't anticipate, especially with lot stock that looks like what we have in Hinsdale, especially in Robbins, where the lots are so goofy, so irregular.
Right.
Removing as many questions, right, on the front end, buying as many assurances as you can before they go to contract, we hope will be enough. And like I said, this palette, we're trying to expedite reviews, waiving permit fees, and in some cases, this could be a $40,000, $50,000, renovation. That coupled with maybe some of the relaxed, bug zoning regs, will be enough, we hope.
I bet if, like, just said that language you put into the start of the ZBA, like, I can't remember exactly where it is in here, but just that little paragraph alone could have changed the outcome of so many things in the past. Because I always felt like they were kind of handcuffed to worried about precedent.
And Julie's right. I mean, they really struggle with that because you've got those standards and they're codified
Right.
and it's in black and white. And, somebody shows up to cry foul and you put them immediately in a difficult position.
Right. That's
And-
where I
and
feel even if
sometimes it's tough to get past that not self-created standard.
Where if it doesn't somehow, these new proposed relaxed regulations, if it doesn't fit in there, I just feel like the chance of it getting a variation, if the intention's right and it makes sense historically, I think that the odds are going to go up, which I think is
that would
big. Fantastic job. I'm really, really impressed. This might be a template, I would agree, for other communities that I'm sure are struggling, and, how do you get at this? Somebody recently, they were mentioning some community, a historic area in California, and they had something, not all this, but like an overlay district, and they were struggling with, in that case, it was a much more mid-century modern attempt, and how do you preserve those? And it was just fascinating, the words, the things they were talking about. I'm like, wait, that is in this package, so kudos to you. Thanks. Any other questions or comments by the group? If not, I would love to get a recommendation, a motion to approve case A-03-2022 for the map amendment, text amendment to various sections of zoning code, and text amendment to Title 14 of the Village Code to establish a historic overlay district and for related amendments as requested by the Village of Hinsdale.
So moved?
Second, Curry?
We have a roll call vote, please, Bethany?
Commissioner Curry?
Aye.
Commissioner Cernovich?
Aye.
Commissioner Willoughby?
Aye.
Commissioner Fiasconi?
Aye.
Commissioner Moore?
Aye.
Chairman Cashman?
Aye. And can I have a motion to adjourn?
Moved.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Thank you, great job.
Good
Oh,
job.
you made this so easy.